Hi, it's Dion here. I just thought I'd make a super quick video. I start work in probably 30 minutes, so I have to keep this to a bare minimum. I just been watching these documentaries lately about how stigmatized, the treatments are for opiate or heroin addiction. They were saying how, you know, abstinence-only models like AA, NA, 12 steps, those may work for some people, but for the majority of opiate addicts or heroin addicts, I was a heroin addict, so I tend to veer more towards calling it a heroin addiction because that was my story. But if you have a different drug that you were using that was opiate based, call it whatever you want. So the abstinence only model just doesn't work for everyone. I attempted the abstinence only model, several attempts. I made it at trying to get clean. I was able to get clean in jail, go through the whole withdrawal process because it was a forced withdrawal. I had no choice in the matter. I would have never done that, if it hadn't been forced on me. And there were a couple times I got out of jail and I seriously wanted to stay clean. I really did not want to get another heroin habit. I did not want that. But I was miserable. I was miserable every second that I was sober. The craving to use was so intense that I could not get past that thought of wanting to use. It was just this rotating thought in my head constantly that I wanted to use. And I finally gave in. I stayed clean for just a very brief period of time. And I remember when I used the first time, it was relief. That's what I felt. I felt relief. I felt like, thank God, this misery is over. And what I initially did was I would use 2 days a week, like let's say Monday and Thursday. And I would always separate each day that I used with several days in between because I thought I'd be less likely to catch a habit if I wasn't doing them consecutively in a row, 1 or 2 days in a row. I just did not want to take a chance of catching a habit. And the days that I didn't use, I was so miserable that I was taking sleeping pills, anything that I could take that would make me tired, make me sleep. And that's how I would live my life. And I did this for a couple months. The days I used, I would get up, I would live my life and be normal. And the days I didn't use, I would try to stay unconscious. I didn't even want to be alive on those days. It sucked. There's no way to live life. I kept saying to myself, if this is sobriety, fuck it. They keep this sobriety. Keep it to yourself. I don't want no part of it. And I finally just gave in and started using every day again. Because at least in that respect, I felt like I was having more of a life than I was the way that I was doing it before. The craving to use was so intense that I couldn't get past that. And what methadone did for me is it took the whole craving, the whole situation of craving, completely off the table, out of the equation, out of my mind. I have no cravings. None. From the moment I've been put on methadone and was stabilized on the right dose, cravings are a thing of the past. I don't have any cravings. I don't have any desire to use. And it's because of this medication. It did something for me that I couldn't do on my own. I was not going to suffer in that agony of constantly having the craving to use for who knows how long. I researched that it's called, for some of it, it's also called post-acute withdrawal syndrome, where you go through the phase of the craving for a period of time after you quit. Some people have gone through that for months, even years on end, before they ever feel like they can carry on with their life in a normal fashion. I mean, I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand living that way. I didn't want to live that way. But the medication that they have, methadone and buprenorphine, I don't know a lot about buprenorphine. I mean, I do know somewhat about it. I know it's similar to methadone in the sense that it treats heroin addiction or opiate addiction, and keeps cravings at bay, takes away, it takes away, I don't know if you say it takes away withdrawal syndromes. You have to be in a certain amount of withdrawal in order to take it, because if you take it and you have a large amount of opiates in your system and you haven't gone through enough withdrawal, it can kick you into precipitated withdrawal, which is the worst withdrawal you can ever go through. And I've experienced that once before. So I'm telling you, it's the worst. I was never offered buprenorphine. I was put on methadone after I had my daughter in the hospital, and the methadone worked for me. So I had no need to experiment with other medications, because the methadone did the trick. That's why I'm such a big advocate for methadone, because I think it gets a bad rap because so many people say negative things about it because they don't even know how it truly works. I know that after I gave birth to my daughter, they were going to put me in a drug rehab, and that way, if I completed the rehab, I would possibly have the opportunity to get my daughter back in my custody again. Well, I went to the rehab to meet with the woman who ran the rehab. She knew that I was on methadone, and she said, "You're going to have to get off that methadone before you come to the rehab, or we're going to have to wean you off of it while you're in here so you can be off of it shortly after you get here." I looked at her like she was crazy. I looked at her like she had two heads, because I thought, are you serious? This is the first time I've felt any sense of freedom from this damn drug in 7.5 long, miserable years, and you want me to give it up? You want me to go back to being miserable again? Because that's exactly what would happen. I'd go back to that state of craving again, and I'd be miserable. I'd be miserable and wish I was dead. If I had lived that way for an extensive period of time, there's no doubt I would try to commit suicide. No doubt in my mind I would try to off myself if that's the way I was going to be forced to live. This medication is so misunderstood. She was telling me that I'm basically still using heroin, just a legal form, and she was telling me I was fucked up on methadone. And when I first got on methadone, I was a little drowsy, so I was kind of falling asleep a little bit, because I was just getting stabilized on it. I'd only been on it maybe a week, and it takes a good 6 months of being on it for the sleepiness to subside and you can feel awake. So it did subside after several months. I still was dealing with a lot of drowsiness and tiredness, but I found out a couple of years ago that I was diagnosed with narcolepsy, which that probably was a bigger part of the reason why I was feeling drowsy and feeling so tired. But she's talking about, I gotta get off the methadone before I can go into that rehab. I thought, are you kidding me? Do people not understand how essential this medication is for people like me? I said, I will be no good to my daughter if I go back on heroin. I said, it's a guarantee I will be back on heroin if I'm not on this methadone. I said, this methadone is the first thing that I've ever taken. It's taken away the craving to use. She said, of course it took away the craving. You're still using. Why would you have cravings when you're still using? I'm like, I'm not still using. I'm not getting high. She said, you're high right now. And she was really pissing me off because I wasn't high. I wasn't high or anything of the sort. I said, I don't know what you're talking about, man. I said, this is the first time in 7.5 years that I have felt a sense of freedom, a sense of relief. I said, I can take a breath in and exhale and not fear for what's going to happen. I said, it's giving me a sense of peace. I said, I just really want to be free from this awful situation. But anyway, I think I have to end this because my coworkers are going to be coming in soon, and I want to end the video now. We'll get back on this topic of conversation at a later time. Talk to you later, guys. Bye.